Thank you everyone for joining our Gender Imbalance in Corporate webinar. Today I have the opportunity and the honor to moderate this session. I'm Gayatri Kalyansundar, and I am the chapter co-lead of the Women in Leadership Toronto US Foundation. A little bit about WIL. WIL was founded in 2001 with the objective of delivering inspirational programs that bring women together to collaborate in the development of their leadership skills and creates positive change in the future of women's leadership. Women in Leadership Toronto is focused on global events, mentorship programs, speaker series, corporate best employer partnership, and diversity and inclusion events to ensure that we have a safe space to connect and support and inspire each other professionally and personally. That's a little bit about WIL. I will hand it over now to Shikha Chakrabarti to talk about Execution and the amazing work that they have been doing.
Thank you very much, Gayatri. Just checking, can everyone see my screen? Okay. So good day, everyone. I'm Shikha, Head of Research at Execution, and welcome to our event today. It's my absolute pleasure to have you all here with us. I'd like to start this event by talking a bit about our Execution website and some key data findings. So as the world's first live gender data space, Execution harnesses the power of data science to track weekly progress and deliver insights on gender equality in executive leadership teams within major indices across 50+ countries. By closing a part of the gender data gap, Execution's goal is to increase the representation of women where it matters and to empower a stronger female voice, which can allow meaningful, sustainable change to occur. We believe equality starts at transparency. So let's dive in. When we enter the data space, we have two separate modules here. Company and institutional investors. In the company module, we can filter by companies and by executives. We can see some quick summary statistics here. And you can also explore by industry. We have about 24 industry groups. By regions, we cover more than 50 countries. By market cap, and from over 70 positions, and not just the top paid C-suite positions. When you click on any company, you'll find more details around the company and the whole executive management team listed. You can see how each company, in terms of gender diversity, performs compared to its industry and country peers. And when we click on any executive woman, we'll also find more personal characteristics, her position tenure, education qualifications, reported children, as shared to the public by the company. There's also a section on social media engagement. Here we have intentionally grayed out men. With Execution's unique proprietary continuous accountability monitoring technology, CAM, we observe how more than 5,500 corporations and 5,000+ asset managers perform their SDG 5 accountability on a weekly and monthly basis. It also allows us to go backwards in time and explore historical data. And When we see the institutional investors section, we cover about more than 5,000 plus investors with the size of their holdings as reported to the SEC. And here we can also filter by asset value. We can also click on a variety of asset managers and compare up to a maximum of 4 at a time. We can also compare institutional investors using the position filter here. And we can not only explore how supportive they are of the overall gender diversity, but also of gender share, which is the actual power of the female executives, the ratio of the value of shares they hold to the value of shares held by all executives. You'll also be able to generate reports containing all of this information. We're not just stopping at gender, we're also expanding into ethnicity, which we call execunicity, and LGBT plus representation, which we call execute pride, because we understand the importance of recognizing intersectionality at the workplace, and especially in top leadership teams. Coming to the some key data findings. Sorry. Let's take a look at the gender diversity of Canada and compare it with USA and worldwide. So the ratios are quite close to each other. We measure gender diversity as the presence of women at the top executive table by headcount. But when we break down worldwide further by 5 regions, we see significant differences in the gender diversity distribution across North America, South America, Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pacific. Here is a snapshot of company-wise gender diversity distribution across Canada, USA, and worldwide. We've ranked companies based on how gender diverse their top leadership teams are on a scale of A to E. Companies that perform significantly well with 50% and more gender diversity ratio are assigned rank A, while rank E is assigned to the worst performing companies. To highlight a few, at 64%, Lululemon Athletica is a rank A Canadian company, whereas Power Corporation of Canada, with no women executives in top leadership, is ranked E. In USA, Bumble is one of the few rank A companies in top, Bumble is one of the few rank A companies championing gender diversity at 60%, compared to Tesla's all-male leadership team. Tate & Lyle, the British supplier of food and beverage ingredients, has a 56% gender ratio, while the Danish Carlsberg Group has all males at the top. From the S&P 500 universe that we cover, the first chart shows the overall gender diversity by headcount of women in executive leadership teams. Beyond just measuring gender diversity as the presence of women at the top executive table by headcount, Execution fosters gender equality by approaching the gender power gap through gender share. So here in the second chart, we capture the ratio of men to women executives with share ownership by headcount. As we can see, the number drops further to about 22%. Now, moving beyond headcount, we focus on the monetary value held by share ownership to see the corporate decision-making power of women executives drop to a shocking 1%. Yes, I repeat, that's 1%. So even though women account for about a quarter of the top executives at the S&P 500 companies, they only control about 1% of the value of shares held among their male counterparts. Therefore, male executives control 99 times more S&P 500 shares than women. We call this the giant gender power gap. The differences only increase for women of color. When we look at CEOs in particular, it is even more shocking to find that even when the handful of women do make it to the top, they remain undervalued. Women CEOs control less than 1% shares. In addition to far fewer women CEOs, another reason why women earn less is they tend to have executive roles in departments such as human resources and marketing, where equity ownership levels tend to be far lower than for positions such as chief technology officer. The stock ownership data shows men accumulating more company shares at almost every level. We see that founder, executive chair, and CEOs are highly powerful and valuable positions because when we remove them, the ratio is still skewed and increased to about 20%, far below parity, and the power gap remains. This indicates that these three most powerful positions are mainly held by men. And this giant gender power gap is predominantly driven by these three positions as well as CTOs. Therefore, even as more women get promoted to C-suite jobs, the disparity with male peers grows mostly due to the imbalance in corporate ownership. So I hope this was of interest, and we invite everyone interested. You're very welcome to get complimentary access and explore the tool. Please feel free to reach out with any questions and feedback to Katharina here, katharina.hopner@execution.com. I'll leave a comment here in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shikha. That was actually very interesting, with some very interesting stats coming out, especially as it relates to gender share, which is a key indicator of ability to influence decisions, ability to make meaningful change. So thank you for that. We'll move on to the keynote speech. For the keynote speech, we actually have a very interesting guest who has actually recorded their speech as a result of being at the Climate Week in New York City. This is Hella Bank Jorgensen, who has been kind enough to pre-record her keynote. If there are questions for Hella, please let us know via chat, and we will make sure to send them to her so that she can look through them and respond. To give you a little bit of background about Hella, she is a globally recognized sustainability, climate change, and ESG advisor with 30 years of experience helping global companies and investors turn sustainability into strong and reliable financial results. Hella has worked with hundreds of world-leading companies, including IKEA, Nike, Shell, Unilever, etc. She's on the board of she's the CEO of Competent Boards, which offers online ESG competent board certification and designation programs. Hella developed the program to help board members, execs, advisors confidently identify, articulate, and act upon their business's most material ESG aspects. This program has engaged several world-class business leaders, like Paul Polman, former Unilever CEO, who calls it an incredible initiative. Hella was the creator of the world's first green account inspired by life cycle assessments, as well as the world's first integrated report. Hella also developed the first holistic supply chain program and was a principal organizer for the CEO Investor Network for Business Ethics and Non-Financial Reporting. In 2020, Hella was awarded the Global Impact Award and named one of the 5 people in ESG to look out for. Now we'll move on to listening to Hella's keynote address.
Good day to you all, wherever you may be. I'm very delighted and thankful to be joining you today to talk about the importance of female leadership in business and how we can work together to address the gender imbalance in boardrooms and around executive tables. A warm thank you to the organizers for inviting me to do this keynote speech, especially in this week where I'll be in New York talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's also Climate Week. And there's one thing in terms of Sustainable Development Goals, and that is this one, SDG number 5. And we will be talking a bit about that. But honestly, the picture right now is not a good one. The Global Gender Gap Report here from 2022 that was released by the World Economic Forum earlier this year showed that women in North America must wait 59 years to close the gender gap. In Europe, that delay is 60 years. And sit tight, in South Asia, it will take, according to the report, 197 years to get to gender parity. I repeat, 197. 197 years. That's far, far too long. It's a waste. It's a waste because studies shows that women bring so many qualities to the table. Not only diversity of thought and uniquely important perspective, but also financial success, innovation, ethical leadership, and a caring culture to businesses. It's not to say that men do not do that, but isn't it stupid for companies not to take advantage of the value diversity brings? A study by Stanford University in 2021 showed that having women on boards provides diversity in information, evaluation, as well as risk and reward analysis. This, in turn, leads to better decision making. The study also noted that women generally exhibit higher levels of integrity and cooperation, which improved boardroom dynamics. And we know we need that. As many of you know, my organization, Competent Boards, provides education programs on ESG and climate change to board members, business leaders like you, and investors from all over the world. And there are, if I may say so myself, some awesome female thought leaders who work with us, including Sherry Chapman, who is the Global Chief Sustainability Officer at Manulife, Pia Heidenmark-Cook, who is the former Chief Sustainability Officer at IKEA, Jan Jones-Blackhurst, the former first female mayor of Las Vegas and a board member, and so many other role models. I want you to, if you have the time, take a look at the faculty and see the types of role models. So you can find that on our website. But the other thing is our participants, those that I talked about before, the board members, the executives, the business leaders, the investors, go back out to the business world armed with knowledge, tools, confidence that we need to make an impact. And I think especially confidence is something that I hear from a lot of the fantastic women going through the program. It gives me the insight. It's given me that insight I need to be confident in the boardroom, to be confident in my discussions with board members, investors. It gives me that confidence that I know what I need to know in order to provide oversight and have an impact, both on the businesses I work with, but also on my career. And you might even know some of our alumni, such as Joyce Cacho, who is an independent board director at Sunrise Bank, or Mary Francia, who is a recruiter, or Dolores Salmon, who director of global corporate and EHS at Netflix. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get back to the importance of gender power imbalances, and let me share a bit of my story. So for me, it's been a 30-year plus journey in sustainability through both Europe, where I'm originally from, North America, where I live now. But I started as a business lawyer, then as an accountant, pushing the sustainability agenda while I was actually working with PwC. But in 2019, 3 years ago, I found myself in Davos, launching the Competent Boards movement during the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. Back then, very few people believed that boards of directors and senior business executives needed to know anything about ESG and climate change. Sorry. But 3 years later, the penny, or whatever we want to say, is dropping fast. And that is good, as we need senior business leaders, again, like you, that can make a difference. People like you in the boardrooms as advisors or directors or investors. The world needs you to help find solutions to the list of issues boards need to discuss. Let's face it, we are not good at thinking the unthinkable. But that is exactly what we must do and plan for. The worst inflation in more than 40 years has the global economy nervously, I guess, trying to avoid a nosedive into recession or depression. The COVID-19 pandemic shows no signs of going away quietly. That is not helping the many people, especially younger ones, who are, let's face it, worrying a lot about climate change. I think we all are here. But talk to some of your children or friends' children. They're worrying about climate change, biodiversity loss, their future, and yes, their mental health. I can't help referring to, Michelle Obama. In her final speech as the First Lady in 2017, she said, I want our young people to know that they matter, that they belong. So don't be afraid. You hear me, young people, don't be afraid. Be focused, be determined, be hopeful, be empowered. Empower yourself with a good education. Then get out there and use that education to build a country worthy of your boundless promise. This does not only apply to young people, it applies to us all. I believe that the road to sustainability is paved by education. It is not an easy road to travel, and it will probably get harder. The war in Ukraine, which is Europe's breadbasket, is having a terrible effect of food supplies that will only get harsher the longer the war goes on. Add to that the crops already lost or damaged over the past 12 months by climate change induced extreme weather events such as heat domes, fires, flooding, in North America. Then add on top of that an already badly weakened supply chain, rising oil and gas prices, and we will soon have major shortages of basic foods, even in the Western world. Due to the severe heat in Spain this summer, olive oil supplies are also likely to be scarce. It is no wonder that board directors are gaining gray hairs, yet it is part of the problem that we are still dominated, let's say it, by male leadership in too many areas. There is this decision that you all know about by the Supreme Court in the US to overturn Roe versus Wade, which caused shockwaves across America, across the whole world. This will have major implications for women's rights in many US states, I believe. But it will also have major implications for companies and how leadership treats its employees, especially women. These are unfortunately dark, troubling times. Misinformation and misrule are, in charge many places. disrupting lives and disrupting boardrooms. Our collective mental health is suffering badly. If there ever was a time to say, I need to do something, it is now. According to this year's ranking, there are now 44 women running Fortune 500 companies. That's still not even 10%. Where I live now in Canada in 2021, women held less than 1 in 4, or actually 23.4% to be exact, of the 4,900 plus board seats. That was a survey by a company called Oslo, Hoskin and Harcourt, and their diversity report. But although this is a 2.2% increase from 2020's year-end result, women are still underrepresented at the executive level, also in Canada. The proportion of female executive officers increased slightly to an average of 18.2% from 17% in 2020, but that number is largely unchanged since 2015, when it was 15%. And I showed you the gender equality SDG number 5. And that's part of the Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2030, where we should have achieved this. Well, let's just say it's a systemic failure. Back in 2017, a group of Canada's largest institutional investors called for corporate Canada to boost gender diversity. The aim was 30% female representation on the boards and executive teams of the companies that make up the S&P and TSX, so our index in Canada by 2022. Yet here we are in 2022, and we are nowhere close to even 30%. We need board members and business leaders to think as stewards of their companies, not just sitting on a board. You're serving at the board. Integrated thinking and interconnectedness are in my mind, new rules of the games for successful companies and careers. Board directors, business leaders must play their part. That starts when we educate ourselves about all these complex topics and how they affect the companies we work for or we want to work with. Then, and only then, can they understand, we understand, the risks and opportunities that we face in this, let's face it, bit hostile business world, geopolitical issues, etc. But there are positive changes coming. The European Union, so EU, has agreed to its quota for the number of women to be serving at corporate boards or on corporate boards by 2026, mid-year. All publicly listed companies in all EU member states must have at least 40% female representation in non-executive board seats. In America too, the times are changing. In NASDAQ's new board diversity matrices, which were issued last month, companies must have at least one female director or a person that identifies as LGBTQ plus or non-white by August 2023. It's perhaps not much, but it's progress. Quotas such as these can, I'm afraid to say, be a very good mechanism to introduce diversity of thought and representation at the board level and in the C-suite. However, there are still many internal glass ceiling barriers that women face when it comes to professional growth within their companies. But this need to have perhaps regulations in general for these things is so frustrating. In many places, women are now better educated, as I said earlier, make their company achieve better results. So surely more women in leadership positions is a no-brainer. It is simply smart business to give women empowerment in leadership positions. It is smart business to keep pushing the agenda on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has so many benefits in creating long-term value. I spoke at a conference right before Melinda Gates, very proud, who summed up this very beautifully, I thought. She said, as women gain rights, families flourish, and so do societies. That connection is built on a simple truth. Whenever you include a group that's been excluded, you benefit everyone. And when you're working globally to include women and girls, who are half of every population, you're working to benefit all members of every community. Gender equality lifts everyone. Women's rights and society's health and wealth rise together. Good corporate governance now calls for directors to integrate sustainability issues into their company's business strategies. These issues, which have traditionally perhaps been excluded from financial analysis, now need to be addressed by companies, well, from all over the world. For example, take a look at the recent SEC proposed regulations on climate disclosures. American companies, or SEC, will have to provide information on climate risk facing their businesses and their plans to address those. Or in Europe, where they have their own ESG disclosure laws to curb greenwashing. We're seeing that around the world. There are many more regulations, soft laws, and recommendations in the pipeline. There is a lot of work to do, and let's face it, not much time to get it done. And you all know a lot about data, but let me know a little bit more, let me use a little bit more data to illustrate that. In 2021, Sustainability Board report, and I serve as an advisor, full disclosure, examined the world's largest 100 publicly listed companies. The data showed that only 40% of directors serving on a board committee that oversees ESG and sustainability were ESG conscious or had the knowledge, attitude, and behavior that kind of like exhibited sustainability. Significantly, women see the picture, according to this study, more clearly. 52% of the women on those committees were seen as being ESG conscious, only 36% of the men. What's more, fewer than 1 in 10 directors, or actually 8%, had any kind of formal ESG training. Just 8% in the world's largest 100 publicly listed companies tasked to oversee ESG. Not of everyone in the boardroom, but of those tasked in a committee to oversee. 8% of those. No wonder we face an uphill battle. Why do we have so few women leaders? Well, for women, the answer perhaps is obvious. We must start to focus more on developing and demonstrating the skills we have that show that we are people who, well, understand business. We understand where we're headed and our role in taking a business on a journey. That is what will force the breakthrough in the glass ceiling from middle management to the top. And there are so many great examples. We must have women as board directors who understands the ABC of ESG and can make, well, wise decisions. With proper education, they can understand the impacts on the stakeholders, our environment, biodiversity, today and tomorrow. And think about the young people. They are the ones who are going to be the talent. They want this. And we know that we need board directors that can truly deliver the miracles the world needs. Why? Because they are the most influential players in a company. The board directors, well, they hire and fire the CEO. They are the guardians of the company's long-term success. It's stewards of the future. And some of you might know, and I'll show the book I put out, Stewards of the Future, a guide for competent boards. And I think it's so important that board directors agree on the purpose of the business, set the strategic direction, and make informed decisions about what is best for the company and its stakeholders. A company's success in 2022 and beyond will be contingent on how well it embeds ESG considerations into all its deliberations and decisions. Sustainability cannot be an afterthought. Well, or CSR budget. Sustainability must be the proactively embedded compass that every employee and business partner uses. This compass must guide all employees, shareholders, stakeholders, and customers to the company's true north, true North Star, its purpose, value, and impact on everyone and everything that they impact. So what can you do? What can I do? What can we all do together? Well, I think we can support each other. We can ensure that we mention each other's names. We can refer to smart points made by other women. We can introduce each other. We can help each other because it takes all of us to succeed. None of us can change the future of our own. Ask yourself, what will the world look like in 2030 for you and the business you want to work for? What work will you do? What do you care about? Who will be your stakeholders? What will they care about? What will those stakeholders need? Can you and the business you work for provide that? Are you reducing harm or are you creating value? Are you being net positive? As one of our other faculty member, Paul Pullman and Andrew has in their book, Net Positive. Are you a steward of your loved one's future? That might be the most essential question. Are you a steward of your loved one's future? Then go back to the present. And by the way, when I say loved ones, I'm not only talking about I'm talking about many, many people here. We need we need us all to succeed. We are not small islands. We are on a planet and we need to work together. So then go back to the present. Use that insight to shape what's good for you, your company, and your current stakeholders. Care is the currency with greater value than cash to many these days. Board directors and senior leaders must show real care for their stakeholders, especially their employees, to understand pain points and dreams. It is time to care about your stakeholders in terms of mental health, family matters, personal identity, and even the impact supply chain struggles and inflation are having on your customers. Having more female leaders who by nature care, and perhaps care more, will help your company fulfill this important aspect. Nothing you do as a person or an organization should be seen in isolation. Look at the outcomes and impacts in the short, the medium, and long term. We are living in an era of accountability and transparency. There really is nowhere to run and no place to hide from your customers, stakeholders, employees, social media, or your children. So don't tell half your company's story with just the nice pictures and the cuddly animals. Ensure your company practices what it promises and tie your work to concrete, measurable goals and results. Every time we as board directors or senior leaders make a decision, we must think about the potential impact of that decision on all our direct and indirect stakeholders. If we as leaders, directors, investors, simply human beings, don't see ourselves as the stewards of the future, we are letting down our employees, our customers, our suppliers, and more importantly, we are letting down our children and destroying their futures. I believe that trust is the most valuable currency in the 21st century. The 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer revealed that businesses have a 61% trust level globally, ahead of governments, NGOs, and media. Of the four groups, it was the only one seen as both competent and ethical. But beware, trust is fragile. Trust in the bank enables your company to experiment and take more risk. An overdraft will leave you nothing to build on. So ask yourself and your fellow peers, both in the boardrooms and around the executive tables or wherever you work, how are you going to face dilemmas in our evolving society and economy? Ask hard questions too, such as, do members of our board consider the risk and opportunities of climate change as an integral part of their accountability for the long-term stewardship of the company? Which of us has the expertise to provide oversight on climate mitigation and adaptation strategies? Is time regularly set aside during board meetings to discuss and monitor progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion? What will be different about the boardroom in 2030 compared with now? What will be different about the executive team? What will be different about the company and everyone working there? If you want a deeper dive into all this, please join us at Competent Boards on one of our education programs, either for ESG or for climate. We have self-guided online programs, our new condensed ESG Light program, or the full flagship program, that's the designation program, where you get to take part in live sessions with our faculty. You'll immerse yourself deeply in topics ranging from human rights and supply chains and the responsible use of data and cybersecurity to using the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a strategic tool and building trust through transparency. You'll get examples from so many businesses and build a global network. The education will also give you the tools and knowledge that you need to make an impact on your career and your company. I'm personally guided in my work by a special North Star in my book, and in our programs I talk about the 7-generation principle as a philosophy to live by. It's an indigenous principle and a way of thinking that addresses how your current decisions could affect the future. They go by the maxim that any decision we make in our lifetime should result in a better world 7 generations from now. Our leaders in our companies must be courageous and wise. Forget the short-termism, at least without also taking the long view about how we treat our world so that we can leave it better for future generations. If you can communicate that purpose with conviction, you are well on your way to becoming a good leader for the 21st century, a real steward of the future. So with those words, thank you for listening. I hope you found this useful, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and connect with Competent Boards, and of course go on the website competentboards.com to see fantastic faculty, but also so many of your peers who already have been through the programs. Thank you. Have a fantastic conference.
I had to take a few seconds to digest all of these amazing things that Hella mentioned. Primarily the focus on sustainability and the fact that society, it consists of 50% women, and as we include women more and bring them up, we bring up society as a whole. No truer words have been said. With that, I'd like to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please do include them in the chat. I do see a couple already. We will make sure this is sent over to Hella for her to respond to, and we will reach back out to you. On that note, let's get started on the panel discussion. I have three amazing female leaders here who are going to talk us through their experiences as well as guide us in our quest for equal representation and representation on leadership opportunities as well as boards. That being said, I will start off by calling on Katharina to talk about herself and then move on to the other panelists.
Thank you, Gayatri. I'm Katrina Höppner. I'm head of impact at XQC, which is the data that Shika just presented at the start. I co-led on building the database, which we started already quite some years ago, but just launched this year. And personally, I really feel it's time for change. This equality thing is something that really drives my work, especially when I then see this finding that Shika showed earlier, this 1:99 ratio, if we move beyond head count to the ownership, like the decision-making power through ownership. For me, it was really like the question of how far did we get since women's suffrage? It's like I was brought up a bit in the sense like, okay, we have equality, come on, it's not that bad anymore. And data, unfortunately, or luckily, really make it visible that we just have still some paths to walk, right? It's not just 25% of women being executives, and on the board it's already looking better. But yeah, really when it comes to power, still some time to go. Thanks, Gayatri.
Thank you. Beth, over to you now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's been a real honor to be included here amongst the panelists and our guest speaker. I wanted just to provide a very quick overview of my background so that you have context for when we get to the questions. I thought it would be maybe interesting to provide a perspective of just not a listing of my career, but how women were represented during my time in those organizations. So I started my career at a Big Four accounting firm. At that time, thankfully, there was some, I'm going to say, good female representation, both in middle management and at the partner level. But there was no representation of men nor women of color or Indigenous descent. After 10 years there, I moved on to a major Canadian bank where it was predominantly white males. And I did have the benefit, though, of having a female both mentor and champion. And I don't know if there is a distinction between the two, and I had both, luckily. After some time to start a family where I left the formal workforce, I returned in the technology startup space and have been at 3 different companies during that time, all male founders, where the culture very much reflected their personal values and the mission of those companies and the individual passion that they brought to the company. I am now working at a SaaS-driven data company called Zymewire right now as COO. And I'd just like to make reference to Hella, where she talked about a caring environment. And I'm very luckily involved and included in this caring environment at Zymewire.
Thank you so much, Beth. And moving on to Sarah, and aptly on the topic of caring environment, I actually work with Sarah, and I've definitely found that she is one of those leaders. So handing over to Sarah to talk about her experience, her background.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for saying that. Yes, my name is Sarah Jeffers. I work for a hedge fund administrator. I work with Gayatri. She's in our Toronto location, and I'm in our Halifax location in Nova Scotia, Canada. And I think that for me, a lot of the things that Helena said really rang true in her keynote speech. I was raised by a single mother who went back to school in the early 90s. She was doing distance education to get her accounting designation. So I saw, I had a really strong female in my life who was just going against the grain every single day. And I also, have a very close relationship with my father, and the women that he brought around us as friends were all very successful women in their careers. He also worked directly for a female leader for a good portion of his career. So by communication with my family and my parents, I was definitely brought up to see that leadership as a female is something that was achievable for myself. And when I joined the workforce, I really didn't know what direction my career was going to go. I was kind of a lost student upon graduation, but I really lucked out in getting into the firm that I work for today, and having managers who supported me and who helped me develop and encouraged me. And again, back to that support, help, and introduce items that Helena mentioned in her keynote. Those really rang true to me, and it's something that I've always really tried to encourage amongst both my female and male staff that I work with, and also my peers as well. So yeah, thank you so much for including me in this conversation today.
You are welcome, Sarah. Now, moving on to our questions. Before I start, there is a Q&A option here. So we will be providing attendees with the option to ask questions as well. But please type your questions into this box, and I will ask them to the panelists based on the time that we have left. So I'll get started with the questions now. Katharina, my first question is to you. Execution, amazing, trailblazing. These are data points that speak to the challenges. Often, what happens is people assume or we think that things are okay, but in order to highlight that we do have a problem, data goes a really, really long way. So I think that is such a great project. With that, can you talk through your specific role and also what power means in the context of gender inequality?
Yeah, thanks. I think I mentioned my role just earlier, so let's just move to the power straight. So first of all, when we have this discussion about imbalance, I think it's really each time again important to say that it's not about blaming men. It's never about blaming the other group, but we really have to work together. And actually, I would not even call it allyship, but go for co-working. Because just as Helen mentioned before, everyone profits from this. It's not the system where uniquely women would be suffering from. And of course, this also applies if it then goes to women of color or people of color generally. And then there was a lack of data when it comes to really performance data. And when it comes to the power question, to our understanding, which is board data is available, that's great, but they usually, I'm talking about independent board members, right? They meet 10 times a year, while the executive people, of course, also directors, but not only, meet on a day-to-day level. So we understand that there's quite some power there in this day-to-day business. And then by adding the gender share concept, which Shika just explained perfectly before, which is the decision-making power through share ownership. So you're not only sitting at the table, but through ownership, what is the value of your voice? So let's say, what we aim for is understanding power as its roots or center of power, whichever image works better for you. And I think this is really important. Why? Because it's relevant to talk about the pay gap and about the parental leave and health. And of course, this is all relevant, but it's sort of down the stream maybe. So if change is occurring on the top level, I at least really believe that this will have an influence. Let's say you have really 50-50 power on gender share level. Will this be a company with a culture where there's no option for parental leave? Will there be a huge gender pay gap? I mean, maybe at the beginning, but over long term, is it not quite probably that these things will change? And as we sort of have to divide our our attention, right, to where do we actually look for balance. We thought that it's quite important to add this piece of power to all the other great work that's done.
Thank you. With that, I'll move on to Beth. Beth, working in technology and startup, the combination of both is, I think, double the challenges. Just because it's, when I think about technology and when I think about big companies in technology, typically the senior leadership that come to mind are white men. So with that in mind, can you talk us through what are some of the challenges that you've seen and the adjustment and changes that you've made in order to be successful in a predominantly male startup industry?
Yes, excellent question. Thank you. I have been thinking a lot about all of this since I was invited to join the panel. And as many of the fellow panelists have mentioned, we're looking at a broader system. So I thought about an analogy that might work in my answer, where we're looking at the systems at play. And bear with me, the analogy is to an escape room. And for those that aren't familiar with that, it is a game that people choose to play. This is a real life analogy we're talking about here, but an escape room is where you're given a code or a puzzle, clues to solve, and then you're given a key and you can advance to the next room. I believe that in order to get to even the entrepreneurial ship door, there are many antechambers or rooms that you have to traverse and navigate before you can even knock on that door. And so maybe some of us are given keys at birth and we can advance right there, but many of us are not. And the keys or these escape room analogies might be around your economic background, your educational opportunities, the macro and micro influences that come with culture. So all of these things have to be navigated in order to, as I say, knock on that entrepreneurial door. And once you get there, there are more rooms that you have to obtain the clues and the answers for in order to get the key. So we've spoken about capital. Capital does drive business, obviously. And we've mentioned a number of statistics over the course of this seminar so far. In 2021, a study was done and only 2.3% of women secured funding from VC firms. So you can do the math of how much percentage was obtained by men. It's clearly not equal representation there. So that's a very difficult room to transverse. Even if you go more traditionally to banks, they are, you sometimes need to have collateral. You need to have credit experience. And there's ongoing stereotyping that potentially can happen there. Even government subsidies and loans have a great deal of bureaucracy that needs to be managed in order to be successful there. As an entrepreneur, you take those first few months and even years where you're taking salary sacrifices in order to reinvest in the business. And so these are all the systems or all the rooms that have to be navigated. And then you come down to personal choices that need to be balanced. So how much time, how much money, how do you invest into a startup vis-a-vis the rest of your career? And then the obvious question about family and where that all balances out. So there's the systems and there's the personal that ultimately have to be worked through in order to successfully emerge with all your keys intact and the opportunity to be a startup founder or working at a technology startup. So obviously that's something, in spite of all those rooms and all those keys and clues and having to decode all that, It's a space I've now devoted approximately the last 10 years to for a variety of reasons, including the challenge that comes with it, the speed at which decisions are made, the apoliticalness of it, and the flexibility that is also associated with it. So I'm very happy in that space. I will leave you with one personal story at one of the startups that I worked at, where I didn't have to make the adjustment according to what my choices were, but the founder made changes. And that was, he permitted me every day for the course of 6 years to leave the office, and this was pre-pandemic, to go pick up my children. And I believe that my influence there with my family was so positive. I mean, you could ask them, maybe they have a different view, but that I was able to balance both work and home. And I would suggest that perhaps by the adjustment on the founder side, he ultimately got more from me in terms of productivity and loyalty than if I had been working my a standard 9-to-5 job.
Thank you so much, Beth. I think that's a great example of how you can still get the best, but you also have to think about it in terms of, okay, what does my employee need, adapting to it, and then you potentially even get similar talent because the people understand that you're the sort of leader who is willing to, or who is able to adapt to those changes and adapt to your style of working. So it automatically opens up the pool for other strong women to be a part of such companies. So that's such a great point. Thank you so much. Moving on to Sarah. Sarah, in 2021, the proportion of women in leadership roles within financial services was 24%. This was actually projected to grow to 28% by 2030 at the moment. However, this is still below the projection pre-pandemic. So even the pandemic has impacted the share that the proportion that women will have in terms of leadership roles. In your experience, what are the challenges you see that cause this parity? And what can men do to help balance this out in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. And I actually looked into this a little bit more after, you'd sent around the questions that we were going to be talking about today and everything. And I think that there's a few different elements that kind of weigh into seeing the changes pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. And I think a lot of it comes down to, the role that women have played in their careers, in their home life, during different lockdown periods, where, they are taking on a lot more responsibilities on a day-over-day basis, not just in the workplace, but also at home with having to, assist in schooling their children, having kids home while working from home. That is a very challenging, situation to be with, preschools or schools closing down with very little notice. I mean, even just this week, we saw here in Nova Scotia where the government, named Monday as a holiday, and they really told parents, the Thursday before that the schools were going to be closed. That's really difficult to navigate around. And that's just adding, many different levels of burnout and stress to, to people's lives. And that's definitely, we've seen exacerbated over the last 2 years with the pandemic. And I think that what we're seeing is that not just people in leadership positions, but people in our entry-level positions are, burnt out. They're taking on a lot of responsibilities and looking and saying, is being in the financial services world where we're very SLA driven, sometimes is a situation of you got to get the work done and, overtime management, so on and so forth, that can be really challenging on top of all of these other personal demands that people have in their lives. So I think that with people already in the leadership positions, but people who, were the future leaders. We're definitely seeing a lot of them leave the industry to look for positions where they may have a bit more work-life balance or more flexibility that, makes the day over day a little bit more easier to manage or stay on top of. And then to your second point, how can allies like the men in our lives or the men in our workplace, or how can they assist? How can they help? Well, I think it really comes down to identifying these types of situations and looking at how we can be more flexible. I think Beth had a really great example of where her founder and her employer, gave her the flexibility that she could go and leave in the middle of the day to pick up her kids. And I think that by looking at different ways that we can support each other and be supported and ask to be supported as well. I think that's something that women have a hard time with. I recently listened to a podcast where, and I can't recall her name, but she was a former CEO or held a very high position at Goldman Sachs. And she talked about how, she really struggled to ask for appointment time or to leave the office to go take her children to doctor's appointments. And then she started seeing her male peers, taking off for these appointments. And she was wondered, why am I struggling to ask for this? So, being more open to ask for the support that we need as well. I think, similar to Beth's real life story, I had a situation recently where someone in my peer group, she had recently been promoted into the role, and we had like a everyday call meeting at the same time. And one day I was talking to her and she seemed like she was a little bit flustered and a bit of a rush. And I said, what's going on? And she was just like, oh, like the time that we have this call every day is the time that I go to pick my daughter up. And it's just, hard to manage. And I was just like, oh, okay, well, like, let's figure this out. That doesn't need to happen. So I reached out to the person who held the call, who was at a level above us. And I said, hey, my colleague, this is when she's picking her daughter up. Any issues with us moving the call a day or a half an hour earlier? And he was just like, oh yeah, no, I know. She could just call in from the car. And I'm like thinking to myself, have you ever been in a car where you're picking up a child from school? Like that's not the focused attention that you can give. And I said, you know what? Like, I think, if it's not blocking anyone's calendar, like, let's just move it a half an hour earlier. So ended up doing that. And the moment that the invite went out to change the time, she reached out to me. She was just like, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I think that that's the type of, we need to be looking out for each other as well. And when we see situations like that, saying something and doing something about it, especially if it's the difference of a 30-minute call, 30 minutes earlier, it made the world to her. It means that she can give it her 100% attention versus, trying to be in the car while picking up her daughter. You never know what kind of headspace kids are going to be when they leave school. So, it was a little thing that we could do that made her day easier. And also it's that, again, it comes back to that flexibility. How can we look for ways to support each other, help introduce care?
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges as well is, feeling guilty about doing these things outside of, work, like as in, stepping away, even if it is meant to, okay, I just want to get my nails done. Is that like, you don't have to feel guilty about certain things that are a priority to you. And that is the same with childcare. Like childcare is absolutely something that I think women take a lot more of, as it has been proven by study after study. So absolutely, like I think the aspect of, I think if we were to support other women and tell them it's okay that you have that priority and it's important, we'll work around it. I think that goes a long way. Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. With that, I'll move on to another question for all the panelists, but I will start with Beth. My question is, so McKinsey and Company, they did a global study of more than 1,000 companies in 15 countries. And what they found was that gender diversity, so organizations in the top quartile, outperform on profitability. 25% more likely for gender diverse exec teams and 28% more for gender diverse boards. Now, it seems like a no-brainer. Can you talk through your personal experience having diverse teams and the benefits that came with it?
Sure. As you said, it's a bit of a no-brainer. A diverse team for me impacts both me personally as well as professionally. It provides significant learning. It provides creativity and innovation, therefore leading to, theoretically better decision making. I think I become a better person by hearing and understanding and appreciating other people's perspectives. And I think at the end of the day, and I'll say I'm in the luxurious position where I did not experience or was not working on a diverse team. I've left the company. So I voted with my feet when it was not present. Retention is obviously a factor when there is or is not diversity present.
Thank you, Beth. Now I'll move on to Katharina.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, we had another event lately, and the Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer at Carpet, she said, we believe the business case has been proven, full stop. And I really think that it's like, we have to move from the question of why should we do this to how can we do it in the best way? How can we do it together? How can we be more effective? Like, what is key drivers here? And like, for my personal experience, I've always been working in diverse groups, also like on a cultural level. And my experience is that it's just what Beth says, it's super rich. Sometimes it may be a bit more, it may take a moment longer at the beginning because you just have all this different kind of perspective. There's different ways of expressing it. So you may have to take a moment longer at the start to really listen to each other and to take a moment to get into how this other person is looking at the world. But if you invest the time there, you get so much benefit out of it because, yeah, it's easier to speak to my close friends and we all are now in a little bubble, but we will just always agree, right? So if you have more perspectives, doesn't matter if it's on gender, like women and men, or also just from other countries, it may take a moment longer, but it's worth it completely. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that by having, more women in the workplace and in leadership positions, really, really has a focus on team development and people development as well. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the statistics show that organizations that have more women in leadership positions have better results because of the care that women bring to the workplace. I took a look at the McKinsey study, and one of the things that really struck me when I was reading through it, and I related to a lot, was there was a point that they made about how a lot of women in leadership positions are often providing emotional support to staff as well. I definitely have found myself in that situation where I have been the person receiving the emotional support, and also been in the position where I am, helping somebody through a situation. And I think that, by cultivating and growing and developing our staff and putting the effort and the, wanting to put that additional time in with the people, I think that goes a long way. And when you have happy staff who are comfortable doing their work, you get better results. You get more FTE. You see an environment where people thrive. And I think that women really add to that in the workplace and in leadership positions as well.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think one key point about diverse teams as well is if I'm able to see a role model, if I'm able to see a woman in senior leadership who is like me, that means that I have that path as well. And that automatically leads to the retention aspect that we discussed earlier. I think it's key that, there's representation because of the fact that it helps foster the next generations as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I see one question here for Katerina, but of course, so this is specific to Execution. So the question that we have is, what makes Execution different from other gender data collecting companies?
So for me, what makes Execution different is we have this CAM timeline that Shika showed at the beginning, meaning we have actually a live gender data space. Usually data is collected from annual reports only, and then until it's actually out there, may have been a year, and the data is just outdated, 25 to 50%. We had a brief look into that. So we really have like either weekly or monthly, depending on the region, update. So we know the performance, which is a second point. I think that's quite great about our work, if I can say it this way, because we don't look into the policies. Not to say that policy wouldn't be relevant, but it's way more important when someone does instead of what someone says, right? So we actually see what do the companies do, like do they have women or not? And then of course we can also measure over time if they get better. So I also think it's interesting to have all this history. And we have, not sure how visible that was, like in this brief moment of introduction, we have it down to the level of the individual woman. So in the future, we will also build a recruiting tool. And why do I think this is great? Because we don't come up with a score saying, hey, this is our score, believe it or not. But you can use our data and then you use it in the way that serves you. May it be understanding the pattern in your position or your industry, giving you more confidence, right? What Helen mentioned before, may it be redirecting cash flows or whatsoever. So I think this level of transparency also from the data provider perspective is quite interesting. And of course, it's external data. There's also quite some data around where the company would report, but we think it's quite relevant to keep the data set independent so that we, yeah. I think this is maybe not brief. I tried to keep it brief, may not have worked well. What I think is quite unique about the data set we provide.
Thank you, Katerina. I have a question here from another attendee, which I think I will direct to Beth. Beth, how do you combat imposter syndrome, especially if you're the only trailblazer in your organization?
I think and I don't want to broad brush everybody, I think we all fall prey to that, if only for a moment. Sometimes those moments are longer, and we have to call ourselves out on that. We have to keep that type of thinking in check. I've mentioned that I've worked for 3 different companies with 5 founders or co-founders, all male, and having observed them, they all were flying by the seat of their pants. Realistically, I mean, they shared that with me, with the company. There honestly is no more insight from any one person than any other. So we're all in the same boat. We're all figuring it out as we go. And we shouldn't discount ourselves for being in a position of uncertainty and the unknown. I mean, that is what life is about. It's about taking those types of challenges and bringing them to certainty. So when you are catching yourself within those thoughts, and I am certainly guilty of those, it's to leverage the strengths that you do have, to bring those to the table, and to allow those strengths to have impact on the greater organization.
Thank you so much, Beth. I think that's definitely relevant, very important, that all of us are pretty much figuring it out. The key difference that I find is, I have seen my male colleagues, for instance, exude so much confidence about something that they know nothing about. Whereas on the flip side, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, like maybe I don't know as much as them. And then when I ask them later, their feedback is, oh, I didn't know it either. So that's the sort of, that's what goes in my mind when I actually think about, okay, I'm not able to figure this out, what's going on. I'd actually like to ask the same question to Sarah as well. And the reason why is, Sarah, I know you work in a leadership team where, until very recently, you were the single female senior leader. So how was that for you in terms of the imposter syndrome?
I think I've definitely had levels of imposter syndrome through my entire career, from, probably like a couple weeks in being like, do I really know what's going on here? Or, and being scared to ask questions to, I was on a call the other day where, I hadn't been briefed or given the full picture of what was happening. I'm like, oh my gosh, do I actually understand what we do here? Then I was like, no. And I managed my thoughts and I was like, I can figure this out. I've been doing this long enough and got through it fine. But I think that it's something that everyone faces, and especially early in your career when you are kind of looking to advance and looking to work through, and potentially go towards a promotion of, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Is definitely something that, it comes with experience. I definitely wasn't built that way. I was a very shy person when I was younger, and, I'm not entirely sure where my confidence came from, but somewhere along the way, I kind of figured out how to speak my mind and kind of be a little bit louder than the average person. My voice carries quite well. But yeah, like I think that a lot of us face that, and, going through exercises of talking through, well, yeah, I do know this, and this is why I know it. And, figuring out how to kind of put that thought to the side and power through it, for sure.
Thank you so much. Katerina, any last thoughts on imposter syndrome? Okay.
No, thank you for sharing. I really laughed and nodded a lot.
Thank you. So the next question I have is related to compensation, and I will start with Katerina first. So this is a data point that is not often easily available. But if we look at statistics, we see that there's a definite disparity. If we look at Canada, specifically, we see that the gender pay gap is 0.9, so which means a woman earns 90 cents to a dollar that a man earns. Will increased transparency and availability of data give us a better opportunity to address the wage gap. I did want to add to that a little bit, because recently I found a news article where, I think it was California, where you have to publish the salary ranges for that particular role, bringing more transparency into, when you're applying for a role, how much you can expect. But if we become more transparent, how do you think that'll play out in terms of the differences in the wage gap, basically?
I mean, I completely always think that if you have more transparency, and I think data is really good to create transparency, because it's not like, especially in the gender discussion, emotional, but just quite clear, then it's easier to create change. In 2020, Antonio Guterres said, like, gender diversity is fundamentally a question of power, and then added later, the gender pay gap is just a symptom of the gender power gap. And for me, there's quite a lot of truth in there. Like I said this earlier, if we change at the top level of power, the culture of the company will change. So of course, it's great to have more data on the pay gap. I mean, internally, I guess it's quite easy for the companies, but externally, it's a really relevant information for you if you apply there, or also just if you want to judge a company. But if we at the same time focus on the top level, I just can't believe that if you have a gender balance and also a power gender balance at top, that this pay gap will remain over a longer time. And then I think it's also a very interesting question. Carolina Criado Perez, she wrote this book on Invisible Woman. And she's actually saying this, so it's not only the question, because you said the same position, okay, but it's also a question why an HR person would be worse compensated than a CTO, right? Like, you can ask, why are women in the wrong position? Why are few women going into STEM? But what she says, and I just read this because she says it's better than I do. The fact is that worse is a matter of opinion, and opinion is informed by culture. And if that culture is as male biased as ours, it can't help but be biased against women by default. So I understand that it's even the question, and we won't solve this question today, of course, but why is one position of higher value than the other? So really rethink it, just as you said, care a lot as a quality women bring in, and to also value these things that women bring in, or just diversity brings in general. Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a great point, Katharina, the fact that looking beyond the, the framework of this is the value that we want or the value that we expect, and this is higher, that this value that this person brings is higher than this value. For example, being empathetic as a leader, I think should be a tangible, measurable value that should be brought when assessing managers. But unfortunately, and that is something I think as women we do really well. We're empathetic, we're caring. So, as in terms of managing people, I think that element really helps. But unfortunately, we don't always measure by that element. So the worth is not there either based on that. So completely agreed with you. Do Beth or Sarah, do either of you have any thoughts on this, on compensation and increased transparency?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, so I do know that there is a movement, however strong or not it is, about the publication of the pay scale for a given role. I think that that's another metric, though, that needs to continue to be measured, because at least in the technology world, at varying roles, that range can be very, very significant. And so if it's $50,000 to $90,000 and all the male incumbents hold the $90,000 range and the females hold 50, we need to know that. So it's back to the data points that we're talking about, that we really need to continue to drill down to understand the story that it tells.
Thank you, Beth. So moving on to the last question, as we're almost out of time, I'll start with Sarah. My question is, if you were able to access an infinite amount of data as it relates to gender diversity, what would you do differently from what you do today?
Oh, that's a great question. I think really it's just about getting the information out there. I think a lot of people, similar to conversation earlier, they think everything, it's okay. We've been working to get women to make, 90 cents on the dollar. That's way better than it used to be, and I don't think people just in general and in leadership positions have a lot of information around kind of what is happening, A, in their industry, and B, just in general in their community, in their country. So I think really it would be sharing that information with decision makers within your organization, and showing kind of like where we are in the organization versus the norm versus where we want to be and what we want to achieve.
Thank you, Sarah. Going over to Beth.
I'll just add to that. I think some of the stats we heard today and some of the statistics and data that we've been exposed to is shocking. And so I think it needs to resonate as shock. And even if we look at the time horizon, how shocking it is that the increases or the enhancements are marginal at best. And so let that shock value resonate. And then I think, again, it's about interpreting the broader data into your corporate environment. And as I mentioned earlier, to understand it, translate it, and then build plans around it to improve it.
Thank you. I think the two shocking pieces of data that I heard today were definitely related to gender share, but the other aspect was, in order to reduce gender parity in South Asia, it's going to be 197 years. That's almost 200 years, that's almost 3 lifetimes. So definitely putting that data out there and and helping people understand will definitely go a long way.
Yeah, and I think even,
yes, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think even just the stats for North America, 59 years was really, really shocking to me, because, you know, I don't think we talk about it enough. And to Beth's point about, like, let's make plans within our organizations, and let's, you know, get that information out there and work to shift the culture so that we are working towards these goals and creating goals.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And lastly, over to Katharina.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, this is one reason for this event today, right? To talk about this data, to make it known, because if you know it, you can apply it. And then the use cases may be different. Inside a company, you can use it for benchmarking to understand what could be better and what are you actually doing quite well already. Then what I personally think is quite strong to have institutional investors, right? Because they can redirect their cash flow towards gender balance or whatever ethics they support. Like just yesterday, I read this sentence, leveraging investor power to catalyze change. I think this is a really, really important tool. Yeah, and also to return maybe to this thought of how to support each other and what does it take for leadership on a personal level. I really much hope that this kind of data helps the personal women to understand the pattern, to understand this is going on everywhere. Like maybe I'm the CEO, Shika showed that before. I made it up, but my gender share is below 1. So be more confident. Don't believe that it's about you, the way you talk, whatever reasons may be told, but that it's usually a pattern. So you can be more confident, what Hannah said, right? To know how to speak up. And yeah, so this is, I think, the value the data can bring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katharina. With that, we're actually at the end of the webinar. To the panelists and to our keynote speaker, thank you so much for taking out the time to discuss these very important topics with us. And I think we had some great conversation. To the attendees, thank you for making the time. If you do have questions after as well, you can reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to connect you with any of the panelists if you have any specific questions. So thank you so much, everyone. This has been a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.